I mean, produced a much too long a thing today, so we might skip some things over, but you've got them for reference later if you want to. And today, I fear might feel a bit like a history lesson. Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah.
It was Sue's suggestion that we did something on the temple, which is a massive theme in the Bible, and in recent years, I think people have been doing a lot of work. Biblical scholars have been doing a lot of work on the temple and the importance of the temple, and beginning to understand how much of the debates and issues and controversies around the temple in the Old Testament period and the Intertestament period, that's the time between the Testaments, actually informs so much of the New Testament. And when we read the New Testament, sometimes we just don't see things that are there because we haven't got that background. So
in some Gospels, seems to be the real thing they have against Jesus.
Yes.
What he says about it.
Yeah, yes. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's, one of the reasons why he dies, So it's absolutely crucial. So I'm going to try my best. I mean, you know how much agony I've been through this week, trying to work out, what. Hi, Wayne. Great.
Well, I could move there.
There you are.
Thank you.
Graham's just joining us. Yeah. So I was just saying, Graham, that we're going to look at the temple, and it's becoming obvious that this is a much more important theme than we previously thought.
Yeah.
And I'm going to struggle to condense some of the ideas, but tonight's will be a sort of background to the temple, and then in future weeks we'll look at other themes. I thought in the future we can look at creation and the creation narrative and the temple, and we'll see why they become important. So, and then we'll look at wisdom and the temple, and why that's a theme that again we've kind of missed. So, and then look at Jesus and the temple, but look at that last. And I put together, I mean, I'm using material from various authors, but in particular, an author called Margaret Barker, who is a Cambridge theology biblical scholar and Methodist, but I won't hold that against her. And she has written extensively about this, as have others, and it's become important. I just quote from her at the very beginning to say why I called it Raiders of the Lost Ark. You'll see why later. It isn't just to be clever. Why it's important for Christian traditions, and so much that we take for granted in the overall Christian in the church. Things that we take for granted are rooted in the temple traditions. So she's listed them as this, priesthood, the idea of priesthood, the shape of the traditional church buildings, the imagery that we have in theology of sacrifice and atonement, the invocation of the divine presence. We pray that God is present in our worship. That comes from the temple. Even the idea of the incarnation and the resurrection, the idea of a human becoming divine, which is central in Christian thought. the mother of God, we'll see that a bit later on, why the mother of God becomes important and comes out of the temple, and the self-offering of the Son of God, all come from temple rituals, which Jesus would have been familiar with, and the early church would have been very familiar with, but they are our inheritance from that temple tradition. And we'll see that it's not quite as straightforward as we might think, but I'm going to go to the very beginning, and I've called it the Temple Mount, which is the mount in Jerusalem where the temple sat. That is now a very controversial term, because the Temple Mount is the term that's used by Zionists and Christian Zionists, but it is, of course, the site of the Al-Aqsa mosque. Yeah. So that if you call it, in modern terms, if you call it the Temple Mount, it suggests that you're one of the people who are advocating the removal of the mosque, which is a sacred site for Islam, and the building of a third temple. And there's a big movement to build a third temple. But we'll use the term Temple Mount for us because that's what it was called at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's another, seamless thing, which is all right at the bottom of this, which is the idea of uniqueness.
Yes.
Whether, and if you think of, the temple worship in as compared to the worship of the Samaritans, then you have two very similar theologies, ways of worship,
and competing shrines.
And competing shrines, and of course the as congregations, we sort of might get our hackles to run.
Yes.
People talking about unique places.
Yes. Yeah.
Centralizing.
Yeah.
Yes.
A lot will get congregationist hackles rising in this, but we'll pursue it anyway. And I just put this: the Temple Mount as a holy site, and I think really important to. We tend to think of Jerusalem now as a city, but really the whole economy, the whole life of Jerusalem at biblical times was the temple. That's what. Without the temple, there was nothing, because that's all there was. It wasn't on all the commerce and so on was around in the temple and about the temple. I mean, it's not a big place. I'll start with the association with Abraham. And somebody like to read this little bit from Genesis chapter 14, which is very early on. Lots of big words in it.
After his return from the defeat of Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh, that is, the king's valley. And King Melchizedek of Salem brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. He blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, maker of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand."
Okay, so the original name of Jerusalem was Urushalim in Akkadian language.
In Arabic also, Shalim.
Oh, okay. Yeah, really. Okay, so
Or maybe they took it from there. But in the
Yeah.
Bible it's called Shalim.
and Shalim is, and it means the Valley of the Kings. There it's got Valley of Sheba, but that is the King's Valley. Because of the closeness of the name Shalim and Salem and Salem you've got there, it becomes Jerusalem, which is the city of peace, which it has never been.
Because Salam in Arabic
Yeah.
is peace.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
Hebrew maybe the
Shalom in
Yeah.
Hebrew.
maybe the close with
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Arabic
Yeah,
because
yeah,
salam is
yeah.
peace.
yeah, they are very similar language.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you notice the bread and wine.
Mm.
So right from the very beginning, and you notice that this Abraham comes to what is obviously a Canaanite worship place. So even right from the very earliest of times, this place has been recognized as some kind of holy site or a site for the cult or rituals. And Abraham takes full advantage of it. I mean, Abraham is introduced to it. And you note the name Melchizedek. Some of you may know it from another book in the Bible, Hebrews, where Jesus is called a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. I think I'll come to that later. And another event that takes place there, somebody read this from Genesis 22.
I do that.
Mm.
After these things, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I shall show you.
Okay, well, Moriah it's the wider area of the Temple Mount. So it's the sort of the region of that. So Abraham's son, Isaac, Abraham takes his son to sacrifice in the place where where the temple later is there. So you've got these antecedents, you know, of the place where clearly in Canaanite times and early times, it was a center for sacrifice. It was a center for cults, for rituals of some kind or other.
And that, so you see how that's really interesting. Okay.
I mean, Oregon
Kind of just the way in which tradition changes,
and tradition speaks, yeah.
tradition speaks.
I mean, Oregon, the early church father said that Adam's skull was buried there. I mean, that's a legend, presumably.
It's a legend, but Oregon seems to have read everything.
Yeah. But
We
this,
may have got it from somewhere which we don't.
exactly, yeah. So somewhere there's this dude in this same place, Adam's whatever skull is buried, and of course the other tradition is that the site of the first temple, because the first and the second temples were slightly in different places. They weren't quite in the same. They were close, very close to each other, but not quite the same. So the other tradition is that Golgotha, Calvary, is actually the site of the first temple because it was outside the city wall. But that's again a tradition. But it's interesting, these traditions, they grow for a reason, you know, and out of a theology and a way of making theology that we don't do at the moment these days. And there's a picture of the present Temple Mount with the mosque and the old city walls around it.
Right in my place. I might close that.
No, I think
Thank you for the show.
We're gonna have to shoot this soon.
I'm so sorry, everyone.
No.
It's fine, thanks. A tiny bit more. I don't even a smidge of it in my eyes.
You know that. The sun goes down.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Rachel is not pleased with
I'm sorry.
Right, okay. So moving on. Now then, here's another reading. This is from the Quran. And this is why you see the mosque on the dome of the rock. It says, "Glory be to the one who took his servant Muhammad by night from the sacred mosque to the farthest mosque, whose surroundings we have blessed, so that we may show him some of our signs. Indeed, he alone is all hearing, all seeing. And you know that Muhammad had these night visions, and he ascended to heaven to the farthest mosque and back again. And that was from this site in Jerusalem. And that's why the site becomes sacred. And as we've heard now, it's kind of sacred to all three Abrahamic religions, you know, which is why it will never be the city of peace. Yeah.
So is the mosque that we see in the picture, is that then the farthest mosque that's referred to?
No, that's the nearest, I think. The nearest, I think, is the heaven.
Oh, right.
This is the sacred mosque.
Sacred mosque, yeah.
It's going after. Is it going after?
It would be looked afterwards, yes. I think there's a rock inside the mosque where Abraham stood.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So I don't know how much of this we need to read, but let's read it.
And John Donne. We think that paradise and Calvary, Christ's cross and Adam's tree stood in one place. Look, Lord, and find those Adams met in me. As the first Adam's sweat surrounds my face, may the last Adam's blood my soul embrace.
Wow,
So,
John Donne,
John Donne,
17th century
my brother
poet.
and my sickness.
My sickness. Okay. Wow. So should we read this? It's quite long, I think. But this is the establishment of the first temple. You remember that in the story of in Exodus and so on, we have the tabernacle being formed, and we've looked in past weeks at the shape and the nature of the tabernacle, which was portable. And then David promises, to build a house, but not himself, but his son Solomon. And his son Solomon, who is a very successful king, a naughty king, but quite successful, and the period is prosperous. And there's quite a lot in 1 Kings which describes this, but let's just have a little reading of it. Yeah, it's not so long, but it'll give you an idea of what the Temple of Solomon looked like. Somebody read?
I'll read it.
Thanks.
In the 480th year after the Israelites came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. The house that King Solomon built for the Lord was 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. The vestibule in front of the nave of the house was 20 cubits wide, across the width of the house. Its depth was 10 cubits in front of the house. For the house, he made windows with recessed frames. He also built a structure against the wall of the house, running around the walls of the house, both the nave and the inner sanctuary, and he made side chambers all around. The lowest story was 5 cubits wide. The middle one was 6 cubits wide, and the third was 7 cubits wide. For around the outside of the house, he made offsets on the wall in order that the supporting beams should not be inserted into the walls of the house. The house was built with stone finished at the quarry, so that neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron was heard in the temple while it was being built. The entrance to the middle story was on the south side of the house. One went up by winding stairs to the middle story, and from the middle story to the third. So he built the house and finished it. He roofed the house with beams and planks of cedar. He built the structure against the whole house, each story 5 cubits high, and it was joined to the house with timbers of cedar. Now the word of the Lord came to Solomon, concerning this house that you are building. if you will walk in my statutes, obey my ordinances, and keep all my commandments by walking in them, then I will establish my promise with you, which I made to your father David. I will dwell among the children of Israel, and will not forsake my people Israel. So Solomon built the house and finished it. In the 4th year, the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid, in the month of Ziv. In the 11th year, in the month of Bul, which is the 8th month, the house was finished in all its parts, and according to all its specifications. He was 7 years in building it.
Right. So that kind of tells you the architecture. It was posh. It was, you know, intended to be impressive.
Yeah. And it was numerologically defined.
And numerologically defined. Yes. And there's a lot more. You can read those chapters in 1 Kings, you know. But if you look that little paragraph from 11, verse 11, concerning this house that you are building, you will walk in my statutes, obey my ordinances. So there's a link between the temple and the covenant, which is very strong. That, you know, the temple is the place where you can be with God, you can communicate with God, but there's still conditions around it. And the conditions are keeping the commandments, keeping the law. We'll see why that's important in a minute. But rather than concentrating on the architecture, let's discover what took place inside it. And the best way to discover what went on inside it is to look at it from a negative point of view. Because in this year 622, this man Josiah, who was a kind of Calvinist, a primitive Calvinist,
And a reform.
and a reformer, actually, some would say, destroyed the temple, not the physical temple, but the rituals and the things that happened in it were challenged. And so let's have a read. And if you read the negative things, you can see actually what actually happened inside it before, and what had to be, according to Josiah, thrown out. Somebody like to read? This one's juicy.
Shall I do it?
Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Then the king directed that all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem should be gathered to him. The king went up to the house of the Lord, and with him went all the people of Judah, all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the priests, the prophets, and all the people, both small and great. He read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant that had been found in the house of the Lord. The king stood by the pillar and made a covenant before the Lord, to follow the Lord, keeping his commandments, his decrees, and his statutes with all his heart and all his soul, to perform the words of this covenant that were written in this book. All the people joined in the covenant. The king commanded the high priest Hilkiah, the priests of the second order, and the guardians of the threshold to bring out the temple of the Lord, all the vessels made for Baal, for Asherah, and for all the host of heaven. He burned them outside Jerusalem in the fields of the Kidron, and carried their ashes to Bethel. He deposed the idolatrous priests whom the kings of Judah had ordained to make offerings in the high places of the cities of Judah and around Jerusalem. Those also who made offerings to Baal, to the sun, to the moon, the constellations, and all the host of the heavens. He brought out the image of Asherah from the house of the Lord outside Jerusalem to the Wadi Kidron, burned it at the Wadi Kidron, beat it to dust, and threw the dust of it upon the graves of the common people. He broke down the houses of the male temple prostitutes that were in the house of the Lord, where the women did weaving for Asherah. He brought all the priests out of the towns of Judah and defiled the high places where the priests had made offerings, from Gebar to Beersheba. He broke down the high places of the gates that were at the entrance of the gate of Joshua, the governor of the city, which were on the left at the gate of the city. The priests of the high places, however, did not come up to the altar of the Lord in Jerusalem, but ate unleavened bread among their kindred. He defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of Ben Hinnom, so that no one would make a son or a daughter pass through fire as an offering to Molech. He removed the horses that the kings of Judah had dedicated to the sun at the entrance to the house of the Lord by the chamber of the eunuch Nathan Melech, which was in the precincts. Then he burned the chariots of the sun with fire. The altars on the roof of the upper chamber of Ahaz, which the kings of Judah had made, and the altars that Manasseh had made in the two courts of the house of the Lord, he pulled down from there and broke in pieces, and threw the rubble into the Wadi Kidron. The king defiled the high places that were east of Jerusalem, to the south of the Mount of Destruction, which King Solomon of Israel had built for Astarte, the abomination of the Sidonians, for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. He broke the pillars in pieces, cut down the sacred poles, and covered the sites with human bones. It's quite busy, really, wasn't he?
Sort of Oliver Cromwell of his time, wasn't he? Yeah. But I mean, it gives a very different picture of the temple to the one that you read in Exodus and Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
But are we to imagine that it had always been a mishmash, even though really that wouldn't have been really what God had in mind, or any of the, or Solomon, you would imagine, but, or did it creep in later?
I think it was it. I think what was, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I think what happens is that the book that is found, the law, is the book of Deuteronomy. And the Deuteronomists had a strong emphasis. Yeah.
I'm expecting someone to do this and say
the book that's found is Deuteronomy, and it has a strong emphasis on the Exodus and the story of the Exodus. And all of this sort of the first 5 books of the Bible are kind of edited later. So the Exodus itself only begins to appear as the central narrative after Josiah, and the Passover becomes the sort of central feast after Josiah. And what you've got is effectively, as you know, you've got this kind of two traditions competing with each other in the Old Testament. One from this Deuteronomy, from Josiah's reform, and one a kind of hangover from the earlier temple that we've seen, which has a different kind of cultic base. We'll look at it a bit later on in other sessions. But certain differences. So Deuteronomy emphasizes the Passover, the priestly emphasis is on the sacrifice in the temple. In Deuteronomy, it says God cannot be seen. Remember, Moses can't look on God's face. Whereas in the other tradition, God can be seen. Isaiah chapter 6, you know, I saw the Lord high and lifted up in the temple. And he sees the temple, you know, he sees it in the clouds being the clouds of incense that from the big massive bowls of incense that were in the temple. So then this temple gets destroyed. The story moves on. In 586, somebody like to read?
Yeah, but Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign. He reigned for 11 years in Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord his God. Did not humble himself before the prophet Jeremiah, who spoke from the mouth of the Lord. He also rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him swear by God. He stiffened his neck and hardened his heart against turning to the Lord, the God of Israel. All the leading priests and the people also were exceedingly unfaithful, following all the abominations of the nations. And they polluted the house of the Lord that he had consecrated in Jerusalem. The Lord, the God of their ancestors, sent persistently to them by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they kept mocking the messengers of God, despising his words, and scoffing at his prophets, till the wrath of the Lord against his people became so great there was no remedy. Therefore he brought up against them the king of the Chaldeans, killed their youths with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion on young man or young woman, the aged or the feeble. He gave them all into his hand, all the vessels of the house of God, large and small, and the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king and of his officials. All these he brought to Babylon. They burned the house of God, broke down the wall of Jerusalem, burned all of its palaces with fire, and destroyed all its precious vessels. He took into exile in Babylon those who had escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and to his sons until the establishment of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had made up for its Sabbaths. All the days that it lay desolate, it kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years.
So this is a massive destruction of that huge edifice that Solomon had built. All that architecture, all those cubits of walls and towers and all the rest of it just goes as the Babylonians invade. But more than that, you just read on, Harley, from Ezekiel 10.
Then the glory of the Lord went out from the threshold of the house and stopped above the cherubim. The cherubim lifted up their wings and rose up from the earth in my sight as they went out with the wheels beside them. They stopped at the entrance of the east gate of the house of the Lord, and the glory of the God of Israel was above them.
By guarding the two cherubims, two statues of cherubims, guarded the Holy of Holies in the temple. And so what happens here, besides the just beside the just absolute destruction, what Ezekiel sees happening is God actually leaving the temple. So this is quite an incredible thing, you know, that if this is the sacred place, this is where you encounter God, this is where you do your sacrifices. You travel every festival to this place, because this is where God is known to dwell. I mean, there's this closeness of heaven and earth is something we find hard to grasp, you know, but they understood that absolute closeness between heaven and earth. The priests became angels, and you know, and that's why they wore white robes and so on and so on. I mean, it was very, very much intertwined in the rituals. And then God
also they had very strong ideas of holiness.
Yes.
Because the cherubim were enforcers of that. A big scary bird-like thing.
Yes. Holy, 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 Lord God of hosts. Yes. I mean, that goes to Isaiah chapter 6 as well, and his vision in the temple.
When was when were Chronicles written? That's about Josiah's time, or
After, I think they're all edited after the exile. So when you say it isn't just when they were written, it was when they were redacted, and that's why I think it. Yeah. So, and I've just put those verses from Lamentations, you know, the mourning for Israel, for the temple. The Lord has scorned his altar, disowned his sanctuary. He has delivered into the hand of the enemy the walls of her palaces. A clamor was raised in the house of the Lord as on a day of festival. The Lord determined to lay in ruins the wall of daughter Zion. He stretched the line. He did not withhold his hand from destroying. He caused rampart and wall to lament. They languished together. So people were mourning, and you know, I mean, you know, by the waters of Babylon, I sat and wept, and I remembered Zion, and so on. I mean, this was a big, big psychological and spiritual wrench for the people.
And there's something that he stretched the line.
Mm.
I mean, you know, it's sort of, because what you do when you build a boat is you mark it out.
Yeah.
It's a line. And that was something that I wanted before you're building, then stretching the lines. So the undoing that.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Yeah. I mean, time's going on. I want to get to the end if we can. So the next passage, which you can read at your leisure, and you can also read is from Ezra, but also you can read in Haggai and Zechariah in the Old Testament, which is a story about the rebuilding of the temple after the exiles return. But the really important thing is that it is not built from the initiative of the Jews, but at the decree of, the Persian Emperor Darius. So it's kind of rebuilt, but actually not from within the cult of the Jews, but actually given to the Jews in a kind of vassal-like relationship to the empires. And then Herod's temple is the same one as the second temple, but I'll read this. Josephus just writes, and now Herod, in the 18th year of his reign, we're coming now to close to the birth of Christ, at the 18th year of his reign, and after the acts already mentioned, undertook a very great work, that is to build of himself the temple of God and make it larger in compass. So it's the same temple, but larger in compass, and to raise it to a most magnificent altitude, as esteeming it to be the most glorious of all his actions, as it really was, to bring it to perfection, and that this would be sufficient to be an everlasting memorial of him. So there's a lot of disdain in the way, remember Mark chapter 13, Jesus says, see these temples, and I will destroy it in 3 days, and so on. There's a lot of disdain about that. But the second temple gets destroyed in 70 CE. If you go to Rome, you can see this Titus's arch, where you see the spoils of the temple being taken to Rome, 7-branched candlestick and so on. And you can actually see that. It's in that park next to the Colosseum. You have to queue for a long time, though. Somebody like to read this little bit from Josephus describing the destruction of the second temple?
Yeah. But as for the house, God had for certain long ago doomed it to the fire, and now that fatal day was come, according to the revolution of ages. It was the 10th day of the month, Lois, upon which it was formerly burnt by the king of Babylon, although these flames took their rise from the Jews themselves, and were occasioned by them. For upon Titus's retiring, the seditious stayed still for a little while, and then attacked the Romans again, when those that guarded the holy house fought with those that quenched the fire that was burning the inner court of the temple. But these Romans put the Jews to flight and proceeded as far as the holy house itself.
So that one has gone completely in AD 70. And it's still mourned today. So Tish B'Av, the 9th day of Av for the Jewish, is a ceremony of remembering the temple. Remember the prayer in the Passover. This is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. Whoever is hungry, let him come. Whoever is in need, let him come and conduct the Seder of Passover. This year we're here, next year in the land of Israel. This year we're slaves, next year we will be free people. Prayer that's been prayed over, 2,000 years, just that hope. And this breaking of the glass is just a mourning for the temple. It's just a reminder of the temple. So it's how the temple was destroyed. At a wedding, they remember it. So,
Incongruous moments.
yeah. Now, sorry.
Interesting. I don't know if this is a red herring, but comes to mind reading about the inner temple, of course, in legal terms. In London, there's the temple and the inner temple, isn't there?
Yeah.
I've never understood why it's called that, but it's interesting that it's the same sort of language. You've got an inner temple, you've got a temple, just the same as the Jerusalem temple had. But I don't know what the connection is, if any.
Yeah, there's a middle temple, yes.
Yes.
I don't know. We should ask MG because he worked there for a long time. Now then, this is when the controversy starts to come in. You've got a first temple and you've got a second temple. You've got a first temple that's destroyed and a second temple that is built not really from the cult, but from in hoc to empires. So it's partly built with permission from the Empire of Persia. It's extended by permission of Rome through Herod. And so it's regarded as a kind of impure temple. Some refer to it as the harlot temple, not the real temple. And that all the way through the time of the second temple, there was this yearning for the original temple to be restored, the pre-Josiah temple. And this is from Isaiah chapter 57. I'll read it. The righteous perish, and no one takes it to heart. The devout are taken away, while no one understands. For the righteous are taken away from calamity, and they enter into peace. Those who walk uprightly will rest on their captures. But as for you, come here, you children of a sorceress, you offspring of an adulterer and a whore. Whom are you mocking? Against whom do you open your mouth wide and stick out your tongue? Are you not children of transgression, the offspring of deceit? You that burn with lust among the oaks under every green tree, you that slaughter your children in the valleys under the clefts of the rock. Among the smooth stones of the valley is your portion. To them you have poured out a drink offering. You have brought a grain offering. Shall I be appeased for these things? Upon a high and lofty mountain you have set your bed, and there you went up to offer sacrifice. Behind the door and the doorpost you have set up your symbol. For in deserting me, you have uncovered your bed. You have gone up to it. You have made it wide, and you've made a bargain for yourself with them. You have loved their bed. You've gazed on their nakedness. So you get this really extraordinary challenge to the temple, and as if the current temple is a violation of the original temple. And so you've got this two traditions fighting it out. This Deuteronomic tradition, which is bolstered by Ezra and Nehemiah in the rebuilding of the temple. And you've got this other tradition of a different kind of cult. And we'll look at that when we do the session on wisdom and how important wisdom was in the temple. And maybe the one who has been deserted in this is wisdom.
But it's also, you know, sort of running together of religious and political transgression,
Yeah.
and sexual transgression.
Yes, yeah, yeah, and it's quite violent language too.
Yeah.
I'll rush through this, but because it's important that we sort of get the whole story, but in the next 10 minutes. But we then go to the last book of the Old Testament, which is the prophet Malachi, who is really also, like Isaiah, very critical of the temple cult. And now, O priests, this command is for you. If you will not listen, if you will not lay it to heart, to give glory to my name, says the Lord of hosts, then I will send the curse on you, and I will curse your blessings. Indeed, I have already cursed them because you do not lay it to heart. I will rebuke your offspring and spread dung on your faces. The dung of your offerings I will put out of my presence. Charming. Know then that I have sent this command to you so that my covenant with Levi may hold. Levi, of course, the priestly group. says the Lord of hosts. So there's a widespread dissatisfaction with the temple. And that was there. And then the expectation of a new temple in Malachi, and the last chapter 1 of the Old Testament, and placed in the last book of the Old Testament for a very specific reason, and that's this verse, this chapter. See, I am sending my messenger to prepare the way before me, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight. Indeed, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. But who can endure the day of his coming? And who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire and like fuller's soap. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver, and he will purify the descendants of Levi, the priests, and refine them like gold and silver until they present offering to the Lord in righteousness, not as they are now. Then the offering of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasing to the Lord, as in the days of old, as in former years. Then I will draw near to you for judgment. I will be swift to bear witness against the sorcerers, against the adulterers, against those who swear falsely, against those who oppress the hired workers in their wages, the widow and the orphan, against those who thrust aside the alien and do not fear me, says the Lord of hosts. I've just put note, the Qumran community, where the Dead Sea Scrolls, where they refused to acknowledge the temple, but were expecting a restoration. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees too were in dispute about the temple. Now the restoration, okay. But rush through, we've got time to have a little talk about it. The beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. As it is written in the prophet Isaiah, see, I am sending my messenger. Okay, exactly what Malachi is saying, ahead of you, who will prepare the way. And he says it's Isaiah. Mark says it's Isaiah, but it's not, it's Malachi. The voice of one crying out in the wilderness, prepare the Lord, make the way straight. And then the last little one I put in there, somebody like to read this. In the light of everything we've just said, this is one of those little bits of the Bible we pretend not to bother about because it doesn't seem very important, but it's crucial.
I'm reading it. Now, every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in the group of travelers, they went a day's journey. And then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple. Somebody can continue that, Mike.
Sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." He said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor.
So let's look. Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? This is the restoration. This is the moment. And actually, those first two chapters, I mean, we might look at more. First two chapters of Luke are absolutely riddled with temple, stuff around the temple. Zechariah is in the temple, remember. Simeon is in the temple. Anna is in the temple. And if you, well, there's more. There's loads more. And so what we're sort of getting is that this strong movement around all the way through, not just only at the time of Jesus, but growing from the rebuilding of the temple, this strong movement for a return to an authentic ritual, an authentic cult, which was not possible in the temple. And I just added this little bit just to kind of finish off. This is from 4th century Jewish document about the first temple, the destruction of the first temple. 80,000 young priests broke through. This is what is written. Load in Arabia, a large load on Arabia. In a forest in Arabia they will stay. Those that should have been in the forest of Lebanon in Arabia they will stay. So after the destruction of the temple, the first temple, a group go and settle in Arabia. In Galatians, it says, this is Paul, after his conversion, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were already apostles before me. I went at once into Arabia, and afterwards I returned to Damascus. So does Paul actually become schooled in this group? That's the kind of question that is now kind of open in this group that is linked to Isaiah, linked to this expectation, linked to the traditions of the first temple and not the second temple. And even more stunning in Hebrews, it is even more obvious when another priest arises resembling Melchizedek. Remember Melchizedek?
Yeah.
Right? The very first one who has become a priest, not through a legal requirement concerning physical descent, but through the power of an indestructible life. For it is attested of him, this is Jesus, you are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. So Jesus is seen as being, a continuation of that great, tradition that arises on the mount with Abraham, Melchizedek, right through, David, Solomon, right through Isaiah and the very critical prophets, and this expectation, this growing expectation in the time of the Romans, that the temple has to be destroyed, and the second temple has to be restored, and the original temple needs to be renewed. And so Jesus then becomes this renewed temple. Now, how he does that is for a later episode, but that is a kind of background to the gospel and the expectations of the gospel around the temple. Sorry, that's been a bit rushed.
But it's the idea that
Abrogation.
Yeah.
Oh, did I miss something out?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Oh, there is, on the other hand, the abrogation of the earlier commandment. Ah, yes, okay. I'll go back. So I missed the last sentence out, which was a shame because it was the most important. Yeah. There is, on the one hand, the abrogation of an earlier commandment because it was weak and effective for the law dogmatically. There is, on the other hand, the introduction of a better hope through which we approach God. So what is this new hope? The better hope. What is the new temple? What it replaces, and what fulfills all that expectation? Sorry, Graham.
Yeah, I mean, and also, these are the sort of key passages on which Calvin placed his, with Rome. That he's not talking about a temple made of hands, but it's about, and he's also saying that the Lord made nothing perfect. That's, very important in Calvinist theology. And the introduction of a better hope through which we approach God. So
yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think, yeah, as we move on, we'll see there's more. There's a lot more to unpack. But what is, I mean, in a sense, what is rebuilt is not what was there before, but it drew completely upon it, you know.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, and also the idea of the building not made with hands.
yes. Yeah. Which Jesus says,
Yeah.
temple of my body. But what is that body, and how does that body function, and how does that body relate to these earlier traditions? And it's, you know, I mean, what we get is that this was a massively controversial issue at the time of Jesus. You know, I mean, what I've sketched it, and there's all kinds of nuances and differences and disagreements and interpretations, and it provoked violence, you know, a massive amount of violence, as we see, and still does, you know, and still does. You know, that place, you know, closed during Ramadan. You know, the mosque, Al-Aqsa mosque, was closed during Ramadan, because the conflict between these people still continues.
I mean, I'm trying to.
But I've just got confused by the Talmud bit that we've got on this last page, really. All these young priests, then, okay, it's thinking about when the temple was destroyed. They're saying that they went to Arabia, and then does anyone have a clue of what they were doing there?
Well, I think that Margaret,
they're priests, aren't they?
Well, Margaret Barker, she thinks, I mean, whether she's right or not, but what she thinks is that these priests went and they maintained
the old.
They maintained that old tradition. And Paul, this Pharisee, from the other lot, you know, this Pharisee, then encounters Christ on the road to Damascus, and then he goes to Arabia. And in Galatians, he says that he didn't straight away begin his ministry. He spent some time learning about this thing. So what was he learning? He didn't go and spend the time with the apostles in Jerusalem. He goes to Arabia. And what does he learn in Arabia? And Margaret Barker asks, does Paul actually school himself in this old temple tradition?
Oh, God. Yeah. And there's also another, you know, another issue, which is, you know, the necessity for physical buildings.
Yes.
Because, you know, the sort of, you know, part of the Jerusalem ideology was that, you know, there is these especially holy places which were built in a, you know,
yes,
so as to be holy.
Yes.
Why do you think Paul would want, after his conversion, to steep himself in something that already had been quite often criticized? Or was he having some doubts?
Well, I think as we'll look at how some of the ideas of Paul link into the first temple theology. We look at that.
Okay.
And it isn't that he was wanting to rebuild the temple, but his understanding of resurrection, you know, is sort of rooted in some of the ideas of the first temple. So that's the sort of idea of it.
You know, in Yemen, there is a temple. I think when the I don't know what happened. Is it when the fall of Jericho or what? Or maybe the destruction of the temple? Maybe just the priests, but they say the descendants of the Jewish, they build that temple there. So they have, even the Muslim, they will go every year. It's a white temple for not, is it Lut or something like that? They say in Arabic the prophet Lut, but I don't know what is it called. So that temple exists up to now. People go once a year It's a white temple
Wow.
in Yemen.
Wow.
Mhm.
See, I mean, it's just a whole load of stuff that we
Yeah,
Western
like
scholarship
going-
has just missed out on, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Yes, yes, and you know, and it makes you realize that, you know, Judaism and Christianity were original.
Yeah.
They were, you know, they were Oriental religions.
Yes.
And when they got moved into the West, then
Yeah. This one, if he faced with persecution, everybody will be moved. Maybe this, for me, maybe this is from the 8,000, I don't know. There is a temple in
Right.
Yemen. Even the
Fascinating.
Muslim, they
Right.
go and visit it,
Yeah.
like once a year.
Wow. So how's that? I mean, it doesn't answer all the questions, but we'll keep going on this. Is it this interesting?
It's really interesting.
yeah,
There's a lot to unpack in it. Yeah.
But for me, it's like when you look at the first temple, like
We have
with the trees.
a late arrival student, and this is a terrible person who is always late for everything. My fellow did say, funeral today. Hi.
Oh, well, sorry, we just finished.
Yeah, we've just finished, but I mean, perhaps we could give you a summary. Like
If we have the
couple
time, if not,
minutes
next
summary
time.
of what we
Thank you.
talked about.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Somebody's in chat and I don't know what it is. Oh, Katrine. Oh, okay.
yeah.
Ah,
So-
okay.
So when you read the first temple, when they build the first temple, one of the instructions like the priests and the people, they have to be holy. They
Yes.
don't defile,
Yeah, there was a
So-
lot of strict.
so goes together. So when you look at the description of the second one, it's like, because people are not holy, they don't keep the law and stuff like
Yes.
that.
Yes, I mean, but actually it's more actually the instructions for the second temple, particularly that the priests have to be a Levite and a priest has to be physically able, you know. Anybody with a disability would not be allowed
yes,
to be,
and any bodily imperfection.
but yeah, exactly. So that which is,
Examining you for your warts and stuff.
Yeah. well, that's it goes back to last week's. We were talking about Mark,
Yeah.
and apparently the tradition is that Mark had a stumped finger, short fingers,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
possibly no, I don't know. I wasn't there. but that's tradition. It was called Finger or something. I mean, he had this nickname, and according to the Coptic traditions, and that maybe that was why he didn't, as he was a member of the Levites, why he didn't actually become a priest, because he had this imperfection. That's, you know, in the Coptic tradition.
Harsh.
Harsh, I know.